Books you won't believe what unfolded after Juliette Langley walked into Wingrove Library 10 minutes late and accidentally flirted with the mayor's son. From sarcasm in the stacks to late-night shelving games, their summer turned into a forbidden chapter neither of them expected. Welcome to our channel. Before we open this heartwarming tale of secret glances, banned book banner, and one perfectly mismatched library duo, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more slow-burn romances and unexpected love stories to life. Now, let's uncover the unwritten chapters of Wingrove Library. Where dusty bookshelves hold more than just secrets, they hide a love story no one saw coming. The sun spilled through the stained glass windows of the Wingrove Library like it was auditioning for a postcard, and Juliette Langley stood in the doorway, 10 minutes late, arms full of spilled bookmarks, sunglasses halfway down her nose, and absolutely no idea how to look like someone who wanted a summer job. She hadn't meant to apply here. It was her aunt's idea, after a gentle intervention that included words like structure, focus, and it's either this or sorting fish at the docks. So Juliette, whose idea of structure was a 4-chapter nap between romance novels, had chosen books over base and turned up at the library with ink-stained fingers and exactly zero expectations. She was halfway through apologizing for her tardiness when she looked up and saw him. Tall, starch-collared, arms crossed over a button-down shirt with sleeves rolled precisely to the elbows. Leo Caldwell, the head librarian, infamous in Wingrove for having once shushed a mayor during a public poetry reading. He looked up from his clipboard with a raised brow that had probably scared off dozens of volunteers. But Juliette, who had sparred with professors, and once sweet-talked a bookstore owner into trading a rare Jane Austen edition for coffee beans and a homemade pie, simply smiled. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Caldwell." I brought my own highlighters and a healthy disrespect for authority. For a moment, Leo said nothing. Then he blinked. Slowly. "You'll be sorting archives." And just like that, Juliette Langley became the newest summer assistant at Wingrove Library. And unknowingly, the subject of a whispered wager among the Thursday morning book club about how long she'd last under Leo's watch. The first week was uneventful. If you ignore the overturned card of 1970s encyclopedias, the accidental cataloging of a romance novel in the theology section, and the heated discussion she had with a taxidermied owl someone had left in the reference room. But somewhere between the creaky staircases and the rolling ladders, something quietly shifted. She noticed Leo's habits. How he paused at the poetry shelf when no one was looking. How he alphabetized author signatures in his head. How he left post-it notes for himself with tiny doodles in the corners. He, in turn, noticed how Juliette sang while dusting, badly, and how she read aloud when alone in the stacks, voicing every character with absurd precision. They didn't talk much, but when they did, their conversations were dry, sharp-edged, and left her thinking about them long after the lights were off. Then came the first late fee. Juliette, bored on a rainy afternoon, slipped a book into the mayor's private reading bin, a satirical novel titled The Politician's Guide to Strategic Honesty. It was a joke. Mostly. Leo found it before anyone else, and when he confronted her in the staff break room, arms folded, trying not to smile, she said, "I thought it was thematically relevant." He replied, and yet profoundly unwise. She winked. "I'm often both." That night, she found a note tucked into her locker. Technically, this is ground for a formal warning. Unofficially excellent selection. It became a game after that. He would leave her obscure, dewy decimal clues. She would answer with quotes from banned books. They started shelving together at closing time, inventing categories like books you lie about having read and novels with underrated ghosts. Neither of them said out loud, but the library grew warmer at night. She learned Leo loved Greek myths, hated ebooks, and had once studied music before switching to library sciences after a failed piano recital that was, according to him, an affront to Chopin. He learned she made terrible tea, brilliant analogies, and knew the entire works of Jane Eyre by heart. The forbidden part crept in quietly when Juliette realized he was a mayor's son and that she was not supposed to flirt with local government-adjacent figures while on public payroll. It got louder when the book club started watching. The Thursday morning ladies were many things: sweet, nitterly, nosy, and after one too many glances exchanged between the stacks, they had begun to whisper. Juliette pretended not to care. Leo pretended not to notice. But their secret grew between the shelves and the shared looks over coffee in the moments when they both reached for the same book and didn't move their hands right away. And just like that, the summer job she never wanted turned into the story she couldn't stop reading. By week 3, Juliette Langley had broken exactly 6 minor library rules, one slightly major one, and at least 2 hearts if you counted the Thursday morning book club, and she very much did. The Wind Grove Library operated under a system of unofficial but deeply sacred traditions. No whistling in nonfiction, no touching the special collections with dry hands, and absolutely no romance novels left in the political science section. Juliette, of course, had done all 3 before lunchtime on Wednesday. She called it literary realignment. Leo called it grounds for termination, but he still hadn't fired her. And the book club ladies were starting to talk. They'd begun appearing earlier than usual, knitting needles in hand, suspicions in their eyes, strategically placing themselves near whichever aisle Leo and Juliette happened to be working in. At first, it was subtle. A sudden interest in ancient Greek history, despite last week's confusion over the term Trojan. Then came the passive-aggressive commentary. "Oh my, is that the assistant again?" murmured Mrs. Penelope Wren, knitting something that suspiciously resembled a heart-shaped potholder. "She does seem to be around our dear Leo an awful lot." By Thursday, the whispers had escalated into full-blown speculation. Do you think she's distracting him from his duties? Or inspiring? Juliette overheard most of it. Leo heard all of it. Neither addressed it. Instead, they doubled down on professionalism, which, in their case, meant fewer winks and more eye contact that lasted just slightly too long to be innocent. They stopped shelving in pairs. They no longer exchanged cryptic notes on Post-its. And Juliette definitely did not slide him a copy of Pride and Prejudice and Zombies with a handwritten label. A misunderstood classic, just like you. She missed the ease. He missed the chaos. But neither of them said anything until the arrival of Miss Caldwell, Leo's mother. She swept into the library on Friday afternoon like a thundercloud in pearls, escorted by the mayor himself, who patted Leo's shoulder in that vaguely condescending way politicians had perfected. Juliette watched the interaction from behind the new arrival's shelf, frozen in mid-stack. Leo straightened his posture, tucked his shirt more neatly, and dropped his voice into that cool, distant tone she hated, the one he used when pretending to be less himself. Miss Caldwell gave the building one sharp glance, nodded once at the front desk, and then looked Juliette up and down like she was deciding whether or not she was furniture. "You're the summer assistant," she said flatly. Juliette smiled. "Only until fall, unless I'm promoted to Queen of Dewey Decimal." The mayor chuckled. Miss Caldwell did not. Leo coughed, a warning. Juliette dialed it back. Barely. The next hour was a blur of polite inspections and veiled jabs. Miss Caldwell inquired pointedly about archival security. The mayor asked how often staff meetings were held. Leo answered everything calmly, professionally, but he never once looked Juliette in the eye. Not until they left. Not until the door closed. And even then, it took him 10 minutes to find her, in the stacks, reorganizing fiction. "I'm sorry," he said. She shrugged. "I didn't expect her to be so formidable, frostbitten." He smiled, then sighed. "She's a reason I don't do relationships publicly. Or at all." There it was. The real forbidden part. Not just library rules, but family rules. The kind you don't write down because they've already been carved into every choice you make. Juliette nodded. I get it. You're the mayor's son. You have a reputation. No, he said quietly. She has a reputation. I just happen to share her last name. She could have pushed, teased, offered quip, but instead she asked softly, So what do we do? Leo looked at her like he was reading something delicate. We keep reading, he said, but maybe slower, just for now. And for the first time in a long time, Juliette didn't need the last word, because somehow that felt like enough. The next day, someone rearranged the display at the front of the library. It now featured a curated selection titled, Fictional Romances Our Mothers Wouldn't Approve of. Nobody claimed responsibility, but Leo smiled when he saw it. Summer deepened its grip on Wingrove, and with it came the quiet blooming of something unspoken between the shelves, a low, steady warmth that built between glances, gestures, and 100 little ways two people could orbit without colliding. Juliette started arriving early, not because she had to, but because the light in the library at 7:45 a.m. was the color of honey, and Leo always made coffee exactly the way she liked it. 1 sugar, no commentary. He never said it was for her. She never asked, but the mug always had her favorite cheap bookstore quote on it. The plot thickens, which felt increasingly ironic considering their plot had stopped thickening and begun simmering instead. They weren't flirting, not technically. They just had moments, like the time their hands brushed while reaching for the same copy of The Secret History, and neither of them pulled away. Or when she'd accidentally knocked over an entire cart of unsorted romance novels, and he sat beside her on the floor helping alphabetize them while saying deadpan, You really know how to get a guy to open up emotionally. Or when she left a sticky note that read, Stop shelving like a Capricorn, and he replied with a Dewey Decimal number that linked to books about being secretly soft inside. But always, the shelves remained between them, literal and figurative, rows of obligation, family reputation, town gossip, and unspoken promises. Leo remained the responsible one, the careful one, the one who, according to Juliette's inner monologue, kissed with his eyes and apologized with his coffee. He never crossed the line, but he walked so close to it, she could feel his breath in the spaces between their shared tasks. The book club, meanwhile, had escalated from passive observers to full-blown sleuths. Mrs. Penelope Wren started a romantic tension tracker, chart in her knitting notebook, complete with potential confession dates and coded scarf color meanings. One day, Juliette found a bookmark tucked into her personal reading pile labeled, When Not If. She rolled her eyes, but secretly blushed. The forbidden part of their almost relationship became less about fear and more about preservation, not wanting to lose something delicate by forcing it into definition too soon. Every interaction was an unspoken, let's just enjoy this while we can. Every glance was a page turned without knowing when the chapter would end. But things shifted on a Tuesday afternoon when a storm rolled in unexpectedly, flooding the east hallway and cutting power for nearly 2 hours. With most patrons gone and a dripping ceiling bucket as background noise, Leo lit candles around the main reading room like a low-budget Victorian seance. Juliette, soaked from an emergency tarp run, flopped into the nearest chair, eyes glinting in the flickering light. I feel like we're in a Gothic novel, she said. Leo nodded. The kind where someone gets dramatically confessed to in candlelight, right before a mysterious death? Exactly. So if you have anything emotionally risky to say, now's the time. There was a beat of silence. Then he looked at her, really looked, and said, I think I'm afraid to kiss you. She blinked. Why? He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous tell. Because if I do, I won't want to stop. And this place, it's already too much like home. Juliette felt her heart stutter. She stood up, walked over, placed her hand lightly on the back of his chair, and whispered, "Then maybe just kiss me like we're still in prologue." And he did. It wasn't urgent. It wasn't loud. It was a bookmark in the middle of a chapter they hadn't finished writing yet. When the power came back on, they were 2 feet apart again, as if nothing had happened. But something had. Something important. The next morning, she found a note on her desk. Chapter 1 starts whenever you're ready. L. By the following Thursday, the Wingrove Library was no longer just a place for quiet reading. It had become the unofficial headquarters for the most determined operation since the Cold War, the Romantic Intelligence Division of the Thursday Morning Book Club. Operation name? Shelfmates. Their objective? Confirm, escalate, and, ideally, lovingly interfere with the simmering not-quite courtship between Juliette Langley and Leo Caldwell. Mrs. Penelope Wren led the mission from her usual armchair, flanked by Bernice the Biscuit Whisperer and Eliza, I know a look one Harper. They claimed to be working on a knitting charity drive. But Juliette noticed their scarves were all red. Code red, apparently. At first, Juliette tried to ignore them. She had work to do. She and Leo were quietly navigating the strange liminal space that exists after a first kiss that technically didn't happen because the lights were out and no one could prove anything. They hadn't spoken about it directly, but things had shifted. He stood closer. She smiled more. Their hands brushed a little longer. And once, just once, he reached out to tuck a stray piece of her hair behind her ear, looked like he was about to say something, then cleared his throat and asked if she'd file the inventory report on local authors. But the book club was everywhere. They started rearranging books in suspiciously poetic ways. One morning, Juliette walked into the nonfiction aisle to find the title stacked as, Say It, with words, before it's too late. Another day, Leo discovered the biography shelf curated to spell, Don't Let the Quiet Girl Get Away. They weren't even subtle anymore. Bernice started humming love songs near the circulation desk. Eliza slipped a flyer for the annual midnight in the Stax Charity Gala into Juliette's locker with perfect opportunity to kiss under fairy lights scribbled across the corner. Even the mayor showed up just to check on his son, but spent the entire visit winking at Juliette and loudly complimenting her young, disruptive energy. Leo was mortified. Juliette was amused. But it all came to a head when Mrs. Wren cornered Juliette in the break room with a plate of suspiciously heart-shaped scones. My dear, she began, buttering one like it was a weapon of persuasion. You may think we're meddling, but we prefer the term literary foreshadowing. Juliette blinked. Pardon? We're simply encouraging the narrative. Everyone loves a good forbidden romance. And honestly, this one's been slow burn for weeks. Our readers are getting impatient. Juliette opened and closed her mouth, caught somewhere between laughter and horror. Readers? Don't play coy, sweetheart. We've been writing fanfiction. Juliette nearly dropped the teapot. That night, she found Leo alphabetized in the travel section, backward, a sure sign of emotional distress. They're writing stories about us, she said. He nodded, solemn. I've seen the Google document. They think we're soulmates. They've cast your aunt as my jealous ex. Juliette paused. Wait, she did have a crush on you in high school. Leo looked horrified. Please don't validate them. She laughed, bright and unrestrained, and he finally relaxed, shoulders falling, smile tugging at the corners of his mouth like he couldn't help it anymore. Then she added, we could throw them off. He raised an eyebrow. How? Stage a fake breakup. He blinked. So, confirm we were a thing first? Details. They stood in silence for a moment, amusement tugging at the corners of their mischief. Then Leo, voice low, asked, or we could just give them what they want. She tilted her head. And what do we want? He stepped forward, slowly. That's the better question, isn't it? And just before the moment tipped too far, before it stopped being lighthearted and started becoming real, Bernice burst with a tray of unsolicited cookies and declared, I knew it. Chapter 11, ladies. They both jumped apart like teens caught behind the bleachers. And so, the game continued, now with higher stakes and even worse espionage. But Juliette couldn't stop smiling for the rest of the night. Neither could Leo, because somewhere in between the meddling and the misfiled romance novels, the rules had already been rewritten. By the following Thursday, the Wingrove Library was no longer just a place for quiet reading. It had become the unofficial headquarters for the most determined operation since the Cold War, the Romantic Intelligence Division of the Thursday Morning Book Club. Operation name? Shelfmates. Their objective? Confirm, escalate, and, ideally, lovingly interfere with the simmering not-quite courtship between Juliette Langley and Leo Caldwell. Mrs. Penelope Wren led the mission from her usual armchair, flanked by Bernice the Biscuit Whisperer and Eliza, Inoa Harper. They claimed to be working on a knitting charity drive. But Juliette noticed their scarves were all red. Code red, apparently. At first, Juliette tried to ignore them. She had work to do. She and Leo were quietly navigating the strange liminal space that exists after a first kiss that technically didn't happen because the lights were out and no one could prove anything. They hadn't spoken about it directly, but things had shifted. He stood closer. She smiled more. Their hands brushed a little longer. And once, just once, he reached out to tuck a stray piece of her hair behind her ear, looked like he was about to say something, then cleared his throat and asked if she'd file the inventory report on local authors. But the book club was everywhere. They started rearranging books in suspiciously poetic ways. One morning, Juliette walked into the nonfiction aisle to find the title stacked as, Say it, with words, before it's too late. Another day, Leo discovered a biography shelf curated to spell, Don't Let the Quiet Girl Get Away. They weren't even subtle anymore. Bernice started humming love songs near the circulation desk. Eliza slipped a flyer for the annual midnight in the Stax Charity Gala into Juliette's locker with perfect opportunity to kiss under fairy lights, scribbled across the corner. Even the mayor showed up just to check on his son, but spent the entire visit winking at Juliette and loudly complimenting her young, disruptive energy. Leo was mortified. Juliette was amused. But all came to a head when Mrs. Wren cornered Juliette in the break room with a plate of suspiciously heart-shaped scones. My dear, she began, buttering one like it was a weapon of persuasion. You may think we're meddling, but we prefer the term literary foreshadowing. Juliette blinked. Pardon? We're simply encouraging the narrative. Everyone loves a good forbidden romance. And honestly, this one's been slow burn for weeks. Our readers are getting impatient. Juliette opened and closed her mouth, caught somewhere between laughter and horror. Readers, don't play coy, sweetheart. We've been writing fan fiction. Juliette nearly dropped the teapot. That night, she found Leo alphabetized in the travel section, backward, a sure sign of emotional distress. They're writing stories about us, she said. He nodded, solemn. I've seen the Google document. They think we're soulmates. They've cast your aunt as my jealous ex. Juliette paused. Wait, she did have a crush on you in high school. Leo looked horrified. Please don't validate them. She laughed, bright and unrestrained, and he finally relaxed, shoulders falling, smile tugging at the corners of his mouth like he couldn't help it anymore. Then she added, we could throw them off. He raised an eyebrow. How? Stage a fake breakup. He blinked. So, confirm we were a thing first? Details. They stood in silence for a moment, amusement tugging at the corners of their mischief. Then Leo, voice low, asked, "Or we could just give them what they want." She tilted her head. "And what do we want?" He stepped forward, slowly. "That's the better question, isn't it?" And just before the moment tipped too far, before it stopped being lighthearted and started becoming real, Bernice burst in with a tray of unsolicited cookies and declared, "I knew it. Chapter 11, ladies." They both jumped apart like teens caught behind the bleachers. And so the game continued, now with higher stakes and even worse espionage. But Juliette couldn't stop smiling for the rest of the night. Neither could Leo, because somewhere in between the meddling and the misfiled romance novels, the rules had already been rewritten. The annual Midnight in the Stacks charity gala was, by Wingrove standards, the event of the season, a twinkly, slightly chaotic evening of string lights, donated wine, and questionable live jazz, held in the library's main hall, and meant to raise funds for book preservation and community engagement, which was code for a chance to dress up and stare at your secret crush while pretending to browse silent auction items. Juliette hadn't planned on attending. She didn't own anything gala-appropriate, and the idea of making small talk with library patrons while eating mini quiches under the gaze of Mrs. Penelope Wren's matchmaking glare was not exactly her definition of a good time, but her aunt loaned her a deep green velvet dress. And Leo left a note on her desk the day before that read, 7:58 p.m., third row of the stacks. Come find me. L. So naturally, she showed up. The library had never looked so impossibly magical. Strings of golden lights looped through the rafters, old books lined the display cases like honored guests, and someone had dusted the encyclopedias, which in Wingrove was the social equivalent of rolling out a red carpet. Juliette stepped through the doorway and felt the weight of every romantic cliché she'd ever teased Leo about settle softly over her shoulders. She was not a main character. She was not here for a dramatic moment. She was here for a fundraiser, in a borrowed dress, with no expectations. And then she saw him. Leo stood near the reference desk, wearing a midnight blue suit that should have been illegal on someone with his bone structure. He wasn't doing anything particularly swoon-worthy, just adjusting a name card, sipping something fizzy from a glass. But he glanced up and caught her "I like it" with second nature. And the look he gave her, that look said everything they hadn't said for weeks. She walked toward him slowly, trying not to trip over metaphorical tension or literal carpet seams. He said nothing when she reached him, just looked down, blinked once, and offered his arm like a perfect, reluctant Victorian hero. She took it, biting her smile. They mingled, lightly, carefully, pretending not to be two people who had kissed in candlelight and almost confessed something in a storm. He guided her through tables of book-themed desserts and donated signed first editions. She introduced him to the mayor's dog, and all the while, the unspoken thing between them hummed louder than the jazz quartet in the corner. At precisely 7:58 p.m., she slipped away, through the stacks, down the center aisle, to the third row, where the shelves met at a crossbeam and the lights were just dim enough to pretend it was moonlight. He was waiting there. Of course he was, leaning against the philosophy and ethics section, which felt vaguely ironic. "You came," he said. "You invited me," she said. I almost didn't accept." They were still smiling, still teasing, but there was something quieter beneath it now. He stepped forward. "Juliette, this whole summer, I've been trying to do the right thing." She tilted her head. And I think the right thing might just be doing what I actually want." She held her breath. "And what do you want?" she asked. He opened his mouth to answer, and at that exact moment, the lights flickered. A burst of applause echoed from the front hall. Someone had apparently just bid $500 on a signed copy of Little Women. The spell broke. They both laughed, awkward, breathless. And Leo, ever the cautious one, stepped back. "Maybe not tonight," he said. She nodded, but before she left, she reached for a pen on the cart beside them, took his hand, and wrote 3 numbers on his wrist in looping ink. 842.3. "What's that?" he asked. "Your answer. Look it up." She disappeared back into crowd before he could reply. Later that night, long after the guests had left and the lights had dimmed, Leo stood in the aisle and found a corresponding book. French drama, forbidden love, misdirection, passion barely restrained. He smiled, closed the book, and whispered to the stacks, "Touché." It was a Tuesday after the gala, when everything began to wobble. Not collapse, not break, just shift in that uncomfortable way a shelf tilts right before it topples. The sparkle of midnight in the stacks had faded into a blur of polite thank yous and gossip-laced whispers, most of them focused squarely on Leo and Juliette. The book club had been positively glowing. The mayor, meanwhile, had offered Leo a friendly reminder about optics, delivered with one of those politician smiles that made you feel vaguely threatened even as you accepted his handshake. And Miss Caldwell? She had not spoken a word to her son since the gala. Not one. Juliette could feel the shift even before Leo said anything. He wasn't cold. He wasn't distant. But he was measured again, controlled, back to ticking boxes and triple-checking shelving lists like passion had been misfiled somewhere between reference and regret. She wanted to ask him what changed. She wanted to tell him she hated being a secret. But she also knew what it felt like to carry other people's expectations like weighty hardcover editions. And Leo had been balancing his for a lot longer than she had. The breaking point came, ironically, over an argument about shelf spacing. She'd move a row of cookbooks 2 inches left to make room for a poetry display. He said it violated archival symmetry. She said his symmetry was a metaphor for emotional repression. He said she didn't take her job seriously. She said he took everything too seriously. He walked out. She didn't follow. For the next 2 days, they barely spoke. Polite nods, cold silence, a shared coffee pot full of tension. The students noticed. The book club noticed. Mrs. Penelope Wren even left a sympathy muffin on Juliette's desk labeled, "Every good romance has its midpoint crisis." Juliette wanted to be angry. Instead, she was just tired. She missed the teasing, the tension, the possibility. She missed him. She considered quitting. But then she found something unexpected. A copy of The Little Prince tucked into the return bin, full of sticky notes, Leo's handwriting, highlighted passages, quiet thoughts. You become responsible forever for what you've tamed. He never let go of the rose, even when it hurt. On the final page, I missed the way we laughed in the quiet. Her heart cracked a little. That night, she returned the shelf spacing to its original position. And then she waited, not for him, but for herself, for her own courage. When he approached the next morning, his voice was soft. "I'm sorry." She nodded. "Me too." They stood in silence, familiar this time. Then she said, "I don't need grand. I don't need public. But I need honest. I need real." He looked at her, slow and steady, then took her hand, right there in the middle of the library, under the slightly crooked nonfiction sign and the judgmental gaze of a taxidermied owl, and said, "Okay?" Not a declaration, not a confession, but a promise, the kind you make between shelves, the kind you mean. The confession didn't come during some grand romantic crescendo. It didn't arrive on stage, under rain, or at the foot of a bookshelf. It came, instead, in the library's forgotten lost and found drawer, between a single glove, a broken umbrella, and an annotated copy of Jane Eyre that no one ever claimed. Juliette found the book while organizing donations for the town's used book drive. She knew the handwriting instantly. The notes in the margins were Leo's, careful, sparse, brutally honest. One line caught her. Maybe I keep falling for women who burn, because I don't know how to light my own fire. It wasn't a love note. Not really. But it was raw and real and more than he'd ever said aloud. That night, she tucked the book into her bag and walked home with her heart beating like a footnote someone forgot to cite. It wasn't about declarations. It was about permission to feel something that might matter, to name what they'd both been circling like two characters afraid of turning the page. The next morning, she didn't speak. She just left the book on his desk. Open, page marked, underlined. He read it. He didn't say anything, but he closed the book and carried it with him for the rest of the day. Later, while shelving the humor section, Juliette spotted a new display. Books that don't say, "I love you," but still mean it. Every single one had been annotated. Every single one had her name scribbled on a sticky note inside the cover. He didn't say the words. He just gave her a library of reasons to believe them. That weekend, the Thursday morning book club accidentally double-booked the reading room for a spontaneous silent auction featuring romance-themed baked goods. Juliette, suspicious but amused, baked lemon tarts with icing quotes from Pride and Prejudice. Leo donated a pie labeled "Not overdue, just late." The book club clapped when they arrived at the same time, and cheered when Leo reached for her hand in front of everyone. It wasn't scandalous. It was sincere, and a little overdue. That night, as they locked up the library, Leo finally broke the silence. "I thought I wasn't allowed to want this." Juliette looked up, and now he reached out and touched the back of her neck gently, forehead resting against hers. "Now I think we're just writing the story as we go." "Without an outline?" she teased. "Just instinct." She nodded. "Instincts never let me down in fiction. Let's hope it doesn't in real life either." He kissed her, not like it was a risk, but like it was the most certain decision he'd made in years. And in that quiet corner of Wingrove Library, beside the reference desk and a cup of lukewarm tea, the confession finally arrived. Not as a word, as a presence. And it was enough. By the end of the summer, the Wingrove Library felt less like a building and more like a shared diary, filled with inside jokes, scribbled notes and margins, and a dozen moments Juliette and Leo had tried to downplay, yet somehow built a relationship on. The patrons still came for books, of course, but now they lingered a little longer. The book club stopped hiding their surveillance efforts and began openly treating Juliette and Leo like the protagonists in a serialized romance novel. Someone anonymously started pinning chapter titles to the staff bulletin board. Chapter 21, The Softest Touch of Spines and Fingers. Chapter 26, Dewey and Desire. Juliette had stopped pretending to be embarrassed. Leo had stopped pretending not to blush. Their routine had become its own kind of intimacy. She'd arrive early. He'd stay late. They'd argue about genres and grocery lists. She kissed him in the fiction section when no one was watching. He once slipped a key to the rare books room into her pocket with a note that read, "Only for the dangerously curious." They still didn't define things. They just let them exist. One Friday afternoon, Juliette was scanning the last of the weekend returns when she found it. A battered copy of Persuasion, 27 days overdue. It had a bright yellow sticky note on the cover that read, "Late, but not forgotten. L." She rolled her eyes, smiled, filed it under incurable sap, then noticed something else. Inside the book, tucked between pages 87 and 88, was a receipt. On the back, Leo had scribbled a question. "Still want to keep reading the story?" She didn't answer him with words. She answered with action. That night, she stayed late, waited in the rare books room. When he arrived, breathless, smiling, coat dusted with the first September rain, She pulled him in by the collar, kissed him like she was bookmarking this version of him forever, and whispered, "No due date." The next day, the book club baked a cake that read, "Love renewed, fines forgiven." Leo groaned. Juliette laughed so hard she cried. And somewhere between the travel guides and the young adult section, they finally shelved the tension, not with a grand gesture, not with a proposal, but with a quiet agreement of two people who had stopped pretending their story wasn't worth finishing. The last late fee, as Mrs. Wren called it, was never charged. Instead, Leo left the book in the staff pick section with a small card. For anyone who thought they missed their chance. You didn't. Read slower next time. And in the quiet hours, when the sun poured through the stained glass windows and the only sound was pages turning, Juliette and Leo went about their days. Two people, one story. No rush. Just love, well-read and wonderfully overdue. Summer had begun to slip into September with the kind of grace Juliette had always admired in endings. Not rushed, not mournful, just quietly certain. The mornings came cooler now. The sun lingered a little less in the library windows. And the volunteers had started talking about autumn displays and seasonal bookmarks. But underneath all that gentle transition, something unspoken buzzed in the air between her and Leo. What happens next? They hadn't talked about the future. Not really. Theirs was a story built on now. The warm glances, the shared routines, the comfortable hush of pages turning with someone beside you. But inevitability had started tapping gently on the reference desk. Juliette's summer contract was due to end in 2 weeks. Her Anne had mentioned something about a job opening at a publishing house in the city. And Leo, dependable, lovely Leo, had just been offered the full-time directorship of the Wingrove Library, along with a warning from the mayor that optics still matter. They didn't argue, but something between them began to tense again. Julia could feel in the way he hesitated before asking her plans. He could feel it in the way she started walking home a little earlier, saying good night instead of see you later. It was subtle, like the end of a chapter that didn't want to admit it was ending. The Thursday book club noticed, of course. They tried everything. Theme baking, don't leave him scones. Strategic readings, Romeo and Juliet was banned from the premises. And a surprise love stories in transition, exhibit featuring painfully on-the-nose novels like The Long-Distance Dilemma and Kisses on train platforms. Juliet appreciated the effort, but she wasn't afraid of leaving. She was afraid of what leaving might mean. Then one rainy Thursday, while sorting a donation box, she found something strange, a leather-bound journal with her name embossed on the inside cover, but it wasn't hers. It had been placed there by Leo. No note, just blank pages, and a title written in pencil, Our Life, If You Want It. That night, they stayed after closing. She asked him if he wanted her to stay. He asked her if she wanted him to ask. She said, I don't want to leave a story that's just starting. He said, then let's stop writing in chapters. They didn't make a plan. They made a promise. Not to rush. Not to overthink. Just to keep building. Together. Juliette didn't take the publishing job. Leo accepted the directorship, but with conditions. They started talking in sentences that began with we. And somewhere in all that, the story shifted again, not ending, not climaxing, just continuing, the way all good love stories do when no one's watching. There was no wedding announcement, no dramatic kiss under a waterfall, no viral engagement photo set between first editions and cascading rose petals. Just a slow, quiet morning in Wingrove Library, the sun filtering through the stained glass in soft, golden streaks, and two people, Juliette Langley and Leo Caldwell, sitting on the floor of the poetry aisle, sharing a thermos of lukewarm tea and trading lines from the books that had, in their own strange way, written them into each other's lives. It was By all external standards, a perfectly ordinary morning. But to them, it was everything. They had moved in together, unofficially, naturally. First, it was a few changes of clothes in each other's closets, then mugs and duplicate, then a shared grocery list on the fridge that started as a joke and ended with a scrawled note that said, "Do we need more cinnamon, or are we just out excuses to bake things together?" Juliette had accepted a permanent position as a community programming coordinator. Her job description included planning events, running the youth storytelling hour, and, unofficially, making Leo laugh at least 3 times a day, preferably before noon. Leo remained the head librarian, a little less stiff these days, a little more likely to roll his sleeves up and read aloud during low hours, especially if Juliette was nearby pretending not to swoon. The Thursday morning book club had long since dropped the act of subtlety. They assigned themselves a role of plot consultants, insisting that the couple attend monthly dinners, receive annotated reading suggestions, and provide emotional progress reports. Juliette once asked if the ladies ever grew tired of living inside a romance novel. Mrs. Wren replied, "Why would we, dear? You two turned out better than the ending of Persuasion." Their love never exploded. It expanded through quiet evenings, through shared shelves, through arguments over whether to alphabetize by author or title Juliette won, through sick days and Sunday brunches and awkward visits from Miss Caldwell, who eventually came to terms with the fact that her son had fallen for a chaos-loving, rule-breaking, perfectly impossible woman who reshelved mystery novels under literary foreplay. They never stopped teasing. They never stopped choosing. And they never stopped writing their story, one line, one late fee, one moment at a time. Every year, on the anniversary of Juliette's accidental employment, Leo left a new book on her desk. Inside was a handwritten dedication. Never the same, always true. The latest one read, "To the woman who made me believe libraries weren't just for stories. They were where stories began." And she always left something in return. This year it was a note folded into the spine of their favorite shared paperback. It said simply, "I'd still choose you, even if we had to start on page 1 again." So they did, every morning, every chapter, quietly, softly, happily ever after, between the shelves. Thank you for diving into our incredible stories. If you enjoyed the journey, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more adventures. This is just the beginning. There's so much more to come.